Welcome back. Inside the cave were colours on the walls, flower-wiped colours. The first bit of the tunnel was orange, like the sky had been. As the tunnel got deeper, it yellowed, smelling sweetly of flower paint. Then it became purpley blue, paint freshly and smelling rich and homely. Woolawoo stepped into a round cave room of pink stone walls. It smelt of woolruff. The smell made her tummy sick, but excited at the same time. She looked around the room. It was empty except for a warm-looking bed of bluff leaves and ish fluff. She knew was found under a shunda tree bark. Woolawoos did not generally like creatures scratching fluff from trees as they bleed, but it looked cosy. And around the room, and around the bed were nuts and dried fruit. The woolruff, now standing behind her, said,
"Have some, if you wish."
Woolawoo sat on the floor next to the bed and began nibbling fruit, looking up at the woolruff and going hot and tingly in the shininess of his smiles.
"Sit on the bed."
Woolawoo, flushed and slightly annoyed, said, "No, the trees don't like having their fluff scratched out of them. We know this as woolers. Why don't woolruffs?" She looked at his straight, elegant claws on slender, long fingers. The woolruff, ignoring her question, replied,
"Just one fruit, please. They are precious." "Let me get you some juice to drink instead. I squeezed it fresh before drying them."
"Why are you here in our land? The old stories from my Wooler elders tell that woolruffs live beyond this land, beyond the sea. Why have you returned? It is told that your kind left after the Red Clan was banished from our land."
"We can be here. We can be everywhere. It is our time to be here. The swish swish stars said to come back as our ancestors said that they would. When it is our time to return, so we came."
"We? There are more of you." Woolruff ignored her, turned and slid off down the tunnel, just as Woolawoo was feeling it was time to go. He slithed back to her and gave her an ogham nutshell juice to drink, and warmed her with a smile. Looking into those sparkle-squint eyes, she drank. As she drank, she could feel the woolruff's sparkliness sliding into her belly, as if it was in the drink as well. And she relaxed with it. He began talking about his home, meaning the cave that they were in, and all the lovely things around that they would enjoy together. They, Woolawoo thought, and as she thought it, his voice seemed to get further and further away. Sleepiness began to cradle her, and she saw dreamy falling leaves in her mind's eyes. Woolawoo slowly turned, looked at the bed, which seemed to be swirling with colours, and flopped onto it, into a deep sleep. She awoke to feel the woolruff stroking her head with its long, slender clawed fingers. She was dizzy, tired, and thirsty. Woolruff spoke.
"Sweet child, what is your name? Can you remember where we met?"
Woolawoo could not remember where they met, but she could remember her name. "Woolawoo," she sleepily said, then thought, where was she? Warm and cosy, but so sleepy. She looked up into the pretty, handsome face of the woolruff. It wrapped soft bedding around her and nuzzled her. Woolawoo felt that she had to go, but the tiredness and heaviness of her body, mixed with the soft bed, made her stay. Woolruff put an ogham shell to her mouth. The sweet smell of the juice it held made her tummy feel sick, but she drank with thirst's calling.
Not too much now.
He took the bowl away from her.
Woolruff need to whisper you a story.
As Woolawoo's mind began to feel again like falling leaves, the cave swirling with colours, she thought, "This is strange, not normal. What's happening? Magic? Woolruff, not good." But his soft voice took over her thinking, as he said to her sleepy ears, "We are not alone anymore, Woolawoo. We are together. We have always been together. You are mine. Your name is Siestra. Your name is Siestra. You have always been here. You are not alone. Woolruff, your chief. You belong to me." He gave her another sip of the juice, and she fell into a dreamy sleep. Images of Woolruff and Woolawoo dancing and playing happily together rolled through her mind. Behind it all was his voice, telling the story of her dreams.
You belong to me.
Chapter 5. 2 moons had passed. Woolawoo had been mixing flower petal paint and dreamily painting it on the walls as she had been told to do. She had been alone for some while. When the Woolruff returned, looking annoyed at her, he said,
"Is that all you have done, Siestra? No long che lingua," which means you are not as quick and not as talented as me.
Sadly and dreamily, Woolawoo, thinking she was now Siestra, looked down at the floor in her dreamy state. At the same time, a small, quiet part of her mind was trying to remember something.
"Now it is time to get some berries. Then we will eat together and drink together."
He led her in her dreaminess to the cave mouth, then around the cliff corner. There he pointed to a track going up a hill. He gave her a big red flower pulled from a tree, a flower she recognized but could not remember its name.
"When you come out of the forest at the end of this track, you will see bushes with purpled berries. You will drop the flower at the end of the track when you have collected us enough berries. All you can carry, the flower will show you which track to come back down."
And in silky tones he said, "You will not get lost." As Woolawoo walked away up the track, the Woolruff said to himself, "Well, your elders in your village did not tell you,
Or it has been forgotten, that Woolruffs can sense Woolers from a long, long way away, and can call you sweet one, and make you ours."
When Woolawoo got to the blue bushy hilltop, she dropped the flower and stumbled over to the bushes, which swelled and danced through her juice-drugged, hypnotized eyes. As she picked them, her dry mouth and a thirst called her to eat some, and she did. Behind her, she heard a flip-flopping sound. She did not turn round, and in her dreaminess, and would have known what it was normally in wakefulness. It was a pelican, as we call them in our world, where they are quite different, smaller for one thing. In their world, pelicans carry water in their bills for later, as they like to drink warm water, but they have been known to help those in need. The pelican flopped around Woolawoo in circles, sensing her need for help. Woolawoo stood still, trying to think what to do. She dreamily raised her hands to brush the pelican away when it hopped towards her face. When it flapped up to her face once more, she lifted her hand. The pelican hopped onto it and forced its bill into Woolawoo's mouth. Woolawoo's eyes bulged and her body tensed, but she slowly relaxed as the warm pelicaned water washed down her throat. After a short while, her mind began to clear just a little. The blueberry juice and pelicaned water began to replace the drugged juice. She ate more berries and was picking the last to take back when she pricked her finger on a hidden spiked bush caterpillar. The caterpillar curled up and dropped to the floor. Blood ran from her finger as she sucked at it and sat on a rock. Pictures of the caterpillar, the rock, the bushes flashed through her sleepy, jellied mind. They all had names. What were they? Names. Woolruff was sitting studying a large nut when Woolaroo returned. He looked up at her with his squint eyes, and his squint eyes became a sweet smile.
Come, little one, put the berries next to the bed. You have taken a long time, but we shall eat well. He scratched some of the nut into the juice in the oam shell and stirred it with his clawed finger. Once they had eaten, he passed the oam bowl to Woolawoo, who took it in her hands. It was then that she looked towards the cave way leading outside, and she sniffed in the air. Woolruff smell nothing. All is fine. No one comes. I smell nothing, but someone comes. I hear them.
Woolruff jumped up and ran towards the outside. When he came back, he found Woolawoo falling asleep into a deep sleep. The cup lay empty beside the bed.
Silly Woola, you are not meant to drink it all.
But he sat anyway, telling her new name, Siestra, and that now she belonged to him. Woolruff awoke the next day and found that he could not move. He looked down and found his legs and arms bound with vines. He stared up into the face of a very awake and annoyed Woolawoo standing over him. She rolled him heavily off the bed and he bumped onto the floor. She grabbed all the fluff bedding stolen from the Ashunda tree and said, "This is going back to the tree." Then Woolawoo was off, carrying the bedding with her. Woolruff lay staring around the cave. He noticed the wet pool of juice behind where the bed had been and knew she had tricked him, pouring her drugged juice away when she had pretended there was someone coming last night. A short while later, she appeared again, holding a white lotus flower. Types are grown in all worlds. Woolawoo went to where she had seen him put the drugged nut. Woolruff now felt afraid. He watched her scratching lots of the nut onto the lotus petal. Then she approached him with a smile on her face that now made him terrified. He watched as she crouched above his head, holding his head still with her knees. She spoke a blessing of learning over the powdered leaf. Then he watched in horror as she held the leaf below his nose. He held his breath. She smiled. He stared up at her. She grinned. He breathed in. After Woolawoo had whispered into the Woolruff's dreams of how to look after the forest, like not pulling vines down just to make the cliff face stand out, pulling up bushes or taking fluff from the trees that did not like it, especially without being asked, she left the cave and sat quietly outside for a long time, trying to quieten her mind, so that she could see and learn how she got into this mess in the first place. Her teacher, the shaman of her village, often said that life is a place of learning. What was the lesson she had to learn from this, the jewel of the experience? She thought about his shininess catching her. Once her chattering mind was asleep, her bigger mind saw more clearly. She was open, too open to other creatures. She guessed it was why her grandfather taught her to be stronger in her lower belly, with her mind to be resting and anchored within it, rather than fully in her heart, at least around creatures that she did not know. She could now see that the heart's eyes can be caught by shininess of creatures from other places, and blind sometimes in passion of love. Resting slowly, softly and openly in lower belly, she was less attached and caught by them, and she could see them more clearly, listen better for understanding and direction from her lower belly. She had not heard, for example, the warning from the tree spirits as she climbed the hill, just before meeting the Woolruff. Rulers always said that a bellied mind is a strong and happy mind and can tell you which way not to go. She considered that Wangdooglees always knew which way not to go. He had turned away at the beginning of the illness. He must be quietly strong in his belly. She felt foolish and embarrassed that she was so quick to think she knew better than him. As her grandfather used to say, in silence and in soft belly we feel open to a direction, or closed to one, and for safety we choose this way, not that. Chapter 6. When Woolawoo finally left the caves, it was nearly night time, and the moon was not yet awake. Soon she would be full and round in the sky. In the cool blue forest darkness, Woolawoo found her way up the track leading up to the hilltop covered in rocks and blue bushes. Then scuttered up the windy path, which grew lighter with a rich red glow as she came out of the dark forest below and up to the setting sunlight. When near the top of the hill, she smelt a familiar smell. Oogly, my Oogly, she thought. She realized that the wind blew down the hill from him to her, so he would not yet have caught her smell, and she could sneak up on him quietly. She quietly leapt into a tree and followed the scent until she could see him snuffling around the edge of the forest at the end of the track. She thought, he's sniffing the flower that I dropped. Woolawoo found a good whipvine that would fling her to him and sprung onto it. It silently whipped out, and she flew quietly towards him as he sniffed around the flower. As she was about to land on him and tumble him, he neatly stepped out of the way. Woolawoo landed splat on her belly. Wangdoogly gently stepped back onto her, and, standing on her back, he snuffled her in lovely to see you but me gotcha sort of way. He snuffed her face and licked her cheeks, even though he knew she hated him licking her. How did you know I was pouncing on you? Because. Woolawoo pushed him off and said, you always know. A Wangdoogly's strong in their lower bellies. Wangdoogly just tipped his head to one side and looked at her in a puzzled sort of way. Woolawoo looked at the flower lying on the ground and said, glad you knew to come here, my Oogly. You felt to do that, too. Then she looked up and said, as if to the sky, and you don't even know you're doing it. She turned back to Wangdoogly and said, Oogly, I'll always listen to you. I do not know why I did not, and went my way without thinking about you. Then to herself she said, I wonder if somehow Wuraf called me to him. But she spoke too many words to her Wangdoogally. Wangdoogally pop-eyed, boingled at her, and shook his flap ears, then rubbed his head on her leg. Where we go now, sweet Oogly? They walked up and up 2 more hillnesses. Each time they thought they had reached the top of a hillness, they walked across open ground and found another upness. Never the top, just little flatnesses of an old giant's footprints as he had walked up the mountain long, long ago. They reached the 4th open ground. The trees and bushes thinned out, and through a gap in the trees they could see the forest, swooning away below them, a dark blanket in the late evening night. On the high horizon they could see the red tip of an evening sun sinking below the dark forest blanket, like a slowly closing eye. The last of the red sky curled around it, and the sun disappeared completely. The dark blue sky above and all around gently pressed it out like a slow closing finger onto a candle flame.